There has been last week, it was about Thursday, I believe, where a group of men went before a federal judge here in McAllen. We're actually in Port Isabel, so about an hour west of here in McAllen. And the men who were there to face charges of illegal entry into the company ended up not being charged. The U.S. Attorney's Office decided not to charge them. The men were taken away from the court. We don't know if they were released into the community or exactly what happened to them. But we interviewed a legal observer who was in the courtroom who said this is interesting because under zero tolerance, every single person should be charged. Then again on Friday, that same legal observer, who is an attorney, works for a ACLU-type project here in the state of Texas, said he again was in court, and there were people who came in who were parents who ended up not being charged. So even though Washington and the Trump administration may not be signaling, there is some kind of indication happening in the federal courtrooms here in South Texas that every single adult is not being charged with illegal entry, at least those who have children. So that's worth pointing out. To your point about reunifications, we're at the Port Isabel facility. It's run by DHS. It's in the middle of nowhere. We're really close to the Gulf of Mexico, not far from the Mexican border. And this is the spot that we've been told that they will reunite families. We've been told a lot of things over the last 7 days, and we've only been given pictures and video to give to you. No opportunities to be there to see it for ourselves, to report it. This morning, 20 minutes ago, I just talked to a producer in New York. We're trying not to overwhelm the agencies by having 12 different CBS News employees calling. So we have one person who's going to reach out to the agency again today and say, can we be there? When is it happening? I can tell you that a congressional delegation went in this weekend. Senator Elizabeth Warren, a well-known senator, as well as others, were actually taken on the same bus used to transport people with a cage in the bus. They rode that same bus into the facility. And one representative, a congresswoman from Florida, Lois Frankel, says she met a woman, met 20 women actually. And one of them said to her, my kid's been separated from me. I don't know where my kid is. I don't know how to find out where my kid is. So that's where we stand on this Monday, 7 or so days that we've been here reporting. We still haven't seen one reunification happen.
Yeah, I wonder what the likelihood of that happening, considering how well the government has been controlling the images that are coming out of this story. But, you mentioned talking to a few different people there on the ground. By the way, what you brought up about some adults not being charged, I think is truly fascinating because I have wondered what the long-term implications are of somebody receiving a criminal charge and then attempting to legally enter the country later on. Will that be on their record? Will that be a reason to deny them entry into this country? But sort of other than that, I know you've spoken to all sorts of people, residents there on the ground. How are people reacting?
Well, let me just answer. I don't want to interrupt you, but let me just answer that question. Here's the way the system works. If you come into the country, you come in illegally. The first charge is illegal entry. It's a misdemeanor, right? In most cases, you get credit for time served. You pay a fine, could be as cheap as $10. Boom, they get you out of here. If you come back again and you get arrested, the second charge is a felony. That's a game changer. We're talking about more prison time, may not be deported right away. So that's to your first point. As talking about what people here in the community are saying, listen, we have been covering what's obviously happening outside the detention facilities. And, everyone, this is worth pointing out. I have not seen one protester at the processing facility in McAllen that was in support of zero tolerance or in support of separation of families. That's not to say they don't exist. I'm just telling you on the ground where we've been, all the protesters have been people of various ethnic races, ages, locals from the area who've all said we don't agree with this. But last week, First Lady came, went to that shelter. We were standing outside, and I heard a woman yelling from a car. And I could tell she was yelling something in support of the president. So I walked over. She introduced herself. She was wearing a big Trump shirt, playing Fox News on the radio, said, hey, I'm from here. And she launched into this diatribe about why she supported zero tolerance and the separation of families and why she wanted the wall. And I ended up posting the extended video on my Facebook page. I told her I'm not going to cut it or edit. I want you to tell me how you feel. But we got a clip for you this morning because I think it's important that, it's always important that you bring both sides. But this woman had legitimate, articulate concerns about why she supports what President Trump is trying to do. Again, she lives here in the McAllen area. She is a mother. Take a listen.
This has been going on for years. But now all of a sudden the Democrats are trying to make this for their midterm elections. This was going on with Obama. So what's the big deal? Y'all have never paid attention to our border. So now you want to pay attention to our border. This is nothing new. These kids have got it better than they had wherever they came from. This used to be a nursing home. What's the beef? commit a crime right now, you can't have your kids with you. So what is the big issue except nothing but the Democrats have dreamed, that's what the Democrats do.
When you see the separation of families, is it something that bothered you at all?
Not at all.
It didn't.
No, if somebody that I'm with, or if I went to go commit a crime right now, would my kids be able to be with me? Or my grandchildren? Would they?
Now, okay, and by crime, you mean crossing the border?
That's illegal, right? Any kind of crime, if I was to be thrown in jail, for instance, incarceration, I can't have my kids with me, can I?
So as an American voter, that crime is enough that you believe
they shouldn't be trafficking their kids or sending a lot of them by themselves.
So I just want to make sure
we have trucks that are found all the time, semis that are loaded with kids. These people will send their kids on their own. What kind of parents would do that? Yeah, a lot of these kids are subjected to drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and everything else. So what kind of parent would do that? Please tell me. Do they really care? No, it's all just trying to get their foot in the door here illegally.
So you heard her talk about they have it better off here. I want to give you the context of what she meant. There are the two facilities we've talked to you about. The first one is that processing center. That's where people are held in locked cages, moms, dads, children, however they come in. And that's where they're held for 72 hours. That's not what she was talking about. She was talking about the facility where the First Lady went, which is where we interviewed her. And that is a facility that is more of, there's art classes and there's recreation and there's schooling and there's bunk beds and that kind of stuff. That's what she was talking about when she said they have it better off here.
David, it's remarkable when you get an opportunity to talk to people who are in support of this zero tolerance policy the president has implemented. Did you get a sense from talking to that woman that her example of somebody who commits a crime and the child doesn't go to prison with her isn't exactly the same thing as what we're talking about here on the border? That child would go with a relative or someone else. And also the idea of parents sending their children here to the United States, it's for a better life because they're escaping persecution. They're escaping the horrors of which most people here comfortably living in the United States can barely understand because we've not lived through it. So I just wonder if there was some context that she was able to gather, because it becomes very easy for people to have their own ideas parroted back to them if they're not listening to other points of view.
So that woman right there listens a lot, albeit to Fox News, appears to be pretty well versed. Listen, I talked to a lot of random folks on the street who are on both sides of the issue. She was fairly well informed and articulate with her positions. You're right, there is a distinction between someone who, gets arrested for an assault and goes to jail. They're not going to jail you with your child, right? So the child then goes to the dad who comes to the jail, or the grandma, or something like that. But federal officials have also told us that in many cases, parents who cross the border, Vlad, with children have family members who are already in the U.S. And we actually experienced one of those. You may remember hearing me talk about this. We were outside the processing center where they have the locked cages, and we followed one of the buses. We wanted to know where the bus is going. And sure enough, on that day, that bus went to the bus station. And off came about 20 people and 20 children. They all had children with them. And I started talking to one of the dads. He was from Honduras, said he came here, he was escaped, left his wife and 2 kids, by the way, there, and heard about separation of families while he was in detention, was worried that he was going to be separated from his 2-year-old son. But at any rate, there wasn't enough room. The speculation is, I talked to a federal official who said we probably released him because there wasn't enough room that ICE had. But guess where he was going? He was going to Boston because there was a grandfather who lived there. And federal officials say in many cases people actually have some type of relative. And when we were on the border and we saw people getting arrested, every single person that we were able to interview through a translator said, I'm going to Houston, I'm going to Maryland, I'm going to Dallas, I'm going to... So they did have people that they either were related to or knew.
I think it's really good that you spoke to that woman, David. It is easier for us as journalists to get the point of view of the protesters. They're all gathered in one place. They're there because they know the cameras are going to be there and they want to talk. And it's easy to get politicians on both sides of this issue to talk. But tapping into just a regular person who's been living there for years, who has seen people, crossing the border. This is an issue that is right in her backyard, unlike us who live, in the New York area. We're further away from the border. So this is her daily life.
Although we are the city with the largest immigrant population in the country, and the crime rate in New York City is the lowest it's ever been since the 1950s, where the president seems to be making the case that in stopping illegal immigration, we're going to bring crime down in the United States. But, David, her point, I did think that her point about the fact that President Obama was known as the deporter-in-chief and that he did not get the same level of coverage or the same level of criticism, let's say. There was certainly coverage of President Obama's deportation policies, but the same level of criticism that is leveled at the Trump administration was not the same with regards to President Obama. She's right about that.
Bingo. And, look, there's been a lot of pushback on Democrats. It sort of seems to be just a company statement, right? And she said it's one of the first things. It wasn't until the Democrats started yelping on it that y'all wanted to come down here. Listen, I don't make the decision, none of us do, as to what we go and coverage or when we go to cover it, right? We come here when we're told to go and cover it. Could there have been more coverage under President Obama? Absolutely. I think everybody would agree to that. But the bottom line is there's that sort of group speak of, the Democrats. Speaking of the Democrats, let me tell you what happened over the weekend. Elizabeth Warren, perhaps one of the best known, came to the facility right here behind me, rode the bus in, and was able to see the inside. It is a detention facility, right? One congresswoman said, it was a jail, and she sort of was aghast. Well, it's a detention facility. You come here to be detained, right? So, but they met with a group of 20 or so parents, and then Elizabeth Warren also went to the McAllen facility, that initial processing center, and here's how she described what she saw, and quite frankly, how she felt.
It's a disturbing picture. There are children by themselves. I saw a 6-month-old baby, little girls, little boys. There are mothers with their babies and with small children. Family units are together if it's a very small child. They're all on concrete floors in cages. There's just no other way to describe it. They're big chain link cages on cold concrete floors and metal blankets handed out to people. We were able to ask people individually about their stories, about what brought them here, where they came from. Those particularly from El Salvador talked about the violence, talked about how the gangs had threatened them individually. One woman explained that she had given a drink of water to the police, and now the police, that the gangs believe that she is helping the police. And so she sold everything she has, and she and her 4-year-old son fled the country.
Okay, everything Elizabeth Warren described seeing, I can tell you that we saw for ourselves. That's accurate. Everything she described being told, we cannot corroborate, not to suggest she's lying, but we have not been given the chance to interview people. And Vladimir and Marie, it's worth noting, for an administration that boasts about a lot of successes, you would think, as savvy as the president is when it comes to showing what he does, that they would want us to see these reunifications. I mean, oftentimes the government is kind of worried about privacy issues, but we're there on the border when they get arrested. I mean, last week I showed the mothers and the fathers and the babies sitting there on the ground. You got to wonder why they don't want to hold some kind of dog and pony show for us to show the reunifications. They're happening. We're being told they're happening, but we haven't been invited to see them. And it's just kind of puzzling. So yet again, we start today asking the agencies whether or not we can see these reunifications. We'll see.
David Begnaud, we're very lucky and grateful that you're there anchoring with us CBSN coverage of what is happening at the border. We're going to check back in with you a little bit later throughout the day. We appreciate it as always, my friend. Thank you.
You bet.